Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. And for your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals, and about whatever it is that we have decided to talk about. And my guest this evening is most interesting because we met at the waterfront here in Portland, and we were sitting across from each other watching the people go by, little kids and families. Beautiful, beautiful day down there. And watching the girls. No, I didn't say that. And I was looking up, and he was looking in my direction, and we both sensed that we were both people who like to visit and talk, and somehow or other we got chatting. And I found just the few minutes we were talking, it was so interesting, I said, you've got to come on the show and talk about who you are, what you're about, that kind of stuff. And kind of without any question, he says, okay.
Yeah, I really didn't know what to expect. It was, like you said, we met sitting across from each other. He needed a bottle opened, and it turns out it wasn't a twist top cap. It was something we needed an opener for.
And you saved my bacon.
And I saved his bacon. I went into the restaurant and found him one. And I had probably known you at that point in time for maybe 30 seconds. And, so I came to the rescue.
And I wonder how you got to be that kind of way in your life, helping people out who looks like they're needing help.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if it's, I'm not that an altruistic person to say, but I did have a good mother. And the one thing that my mother always taught me, originally, right from the very time I was a very young boy, was to always be the first to say hello.
Mm-hmm. And it shows.
And it is stuck in my head. That's one of the things that when you think about your mother and your father and the things that they have taught you, that's the one single thing that always comes up to my mind, because I'm always saying hello to new people.
Yeah.
And we were talking just a little bit earlier about somebody I talked to recently about a vitamin supplement this person was taking, and Dawn asked me, is this somebody that you can rely on for your medical health opinions? And I said, no, this is somebody I met on the street. And he just, he was just telling me about a supplement that he took, and I listened to it. It's not so much that I'm going to run out and buy the product and try it, but it was interesting what he had to say, and more than anything.
And I usually like to start the show off by saying how we are, and I'm a little nervous, as I usually am when I start a show, depending on the guest as to how nervous I am, and that's just my way of being, I guess. It depends on the person as to how long it takes for the nervousness to disappear. And you have a very calming effect, the way you talk with me and look at me, and it's calmed me down. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I feel all right myself too.
Okay. So as the viewers know, the show goes in two major parts. The first part is the Who Are You segment, where I ask you personal questions about yourself, not too personal, of course. So the viewers have an idea where you're coming from when you talk about things in the second half of the show. So, you ready?
I am.
All right. I always have a trick question or two somewhere along the way that you don't expect, okay?
All right.
So shall I ask you one now or wait till later?
I may just have a trick answer for you also.
It's going to be that kind of evening, fellas.
We never know.
Yeah. And I want to make one more comment before we go into the show. Is something about you was just very interesting, looking across with the activities going on. You were just a friendly-looking fellow even before you came over and talked to me. And that's kind of unusual, and I appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you.
And I'll be asking you some questions on how you got to be that way, but I want to put my psychologist hat on. That's way in the background.
Okay.
If I were to ask your best friend, who is Dave? What would your best friend say? Dave is what, in your own words?
Dave is probably one of the friendlier people that he knows. I had, at one time, when I was young, lots of friends from, just from all walks of life and from all socioeconomic divisions and all levels of education.
So he'd say you're about the friendliest person he knows.
He could say that. I wish I had more friends now, but it's when one moves on with their life and they move out of their comfort zone or their comfort area where they once lived, and move to other areas. Friends change, as you probably experience yourself.
Sure.
But and it's something that eventually you settle in with a few good friends, and as opposed to when I was younger, I had many friends. Now I almost prefer to have a very few good friends.
So when and where were you born?
I was born in a western Pennsylvania town just southeast of Pittsburgh called Derry, Pennsylvania. Derry. It's actually a town that was named after Londonderry or Derry, Ireland, and there was a lot of Irish people that lived in the community, as a lot of communities in that part of western Pennsylvania had a lot of different ethnic groups of people in pockets in all the communities. So it was a quite diverse, very interesting small town.
Anything particularly interesting about your cultural heritage or racial heritage, or you're just plain old American white bread?
Well, someone had done some studies on it, and as far as the genealogy is concerned, and a fellow had actually called me up 10 or 15, 20 years ago, and asked me about my name, and I said my name is Seister, and he said his name was Siester, and that he says we are related. And the fellow at the time when he was calling me, I was living in Florida, and he was from Hilton Head, North Carolina. And after we talked on the phone for 45 or 50 minutes, I asked him, I said, would you send me any information? And he did. So, and it turns out that the name Seister is German. That originated back in the early 1700s as Zeister, Zeister, and the first person was that there's a record of is Johann Michael Zeister, who came to the United States into the Burke County, Philadelphia, West Virginia area.
That genealogy thing is something else nowadays.
It's fantastic. I've not had to do anything myself. I've basically inherited other people's that share the same name, and there's a lot of variations of the name, but somehow we are all related. So I have my genealogy on my father's side going back to the early 1700s. And same on my mother's side, just with the father's side. The mothers are hard to follow because of marriages and all that.
Yeah.
But the fathers and the father, the name, the surname. She was an Olson, and her name went back also to the 1600s and 1700s as a ship's captain out of I believe it was Norway.
Norway, yeah.
Yeah. And he ended up also in Pennsylvania, in Harrisburg.
If I were to ask you a question that you don't want to answer, you don't have to answer.
Yeah.
You can say, I don't want to answer. So you have a religious preference that you care to mention or not?
Well, but yeah, I have a religious preference that I was raised Roman Catholic.
Oh, been there, done that.
And yeah, and I can say the same thing. I've been there, done that, and it wasn't always the best experience. I mean, I was a good Catholic, but at the time, the religion didn't meet my needs. I can remember going from I guess about age 6 through it's probably earlier than that. It's probably age 4 to about age 7, and we had our catechism teachers were Italian nuns. They had closed down a nunnery or a monastery or whatever they call them.
Remember those rulers in the hand?
Yeah, and they brought them to our catechism class. They inherited them in our church, and their job was to teach us religion. Well, they didn't speak English, and we didn't speak Italian, and basically about the only thing that I learned was how to bless myself, and one of the odd ways that they had learned, since they had actually grown up through the World War II era. And one of the things that they learned from the U.S. soldiers during World War II in Italy was when a U.S. soldier would go out into battle, one of the ways that they would check things out was and it was to bless themselves. It was the spectacles and testicles, watch and wallet.
It's the family show.
Yes, and that's as far as it went.
Of course.
And that was something that they learned from the American
GIs,
soldiers,
yeah.
American GIs, and that's actually how they taught me how to bless myself.
Really?
Because that was their only. That was their only communications. So, for about 4 years, that's how I really learned. And then I had we had young priests that worked at the seminary that came into our catechism classes, and they basically opened my eyes to how strict the religion was, and whether I wanted to follow that strictness or not was an option that they seemed like they presented it to us.
What did your parents say about your choice on practicing following the religion or not?
It didn't work out so well with my mother. My father was fine with it, and it's like many people that of my age. The marriages, that was always an issue of marrying somebody that was not a Catholic.
Oh yeah.
And we ran into that situation with the idea that I said right off the bat that if there was going to be any problems with religion in marriage, that we would elope. And unfortunately, that's something that we had to do. And fortunately, I'm still married to the same girl. So even though we eloped and got married by a justice of peace.
How long you been married now?
44 years.
My gosh, 44 years.
Yeah.
Are you still a practicing Catholic now, or you don't have
I am not I would say I'm still a Catholic. I still believe in a lot of what I was taught early on. It's just hard for me to be a good Catholic. And I don't know if it's okay to be an okay Catholic or not. I'm not that close to the church to know if, if I still feel like a Catholic. But I have found that I've been to other churches, and there's only a nickel's difference between what I perceive as a religion in other churches as opposed to Catholicism.
I like to think, since I'm a humanist now, I was an altar boy for years, and I got some beautiful, wonderful stuff from growing up Catholic, and some things about growing up Catholic that I was kind of goofy. But I lost my point. But I'm glad I'm what I am today. And for me, I know what my point was. Being simple, as Mama used to always say, be nice, boy. A few words like that, if I think deeply about that, no matter what I'm doing, no matter what's going on, if I'm nice and kind, and then no matter what religion I profess or claim, it's working.
Yes.
Yeah, just
Yes.
be nice. And
I agree with that.
you're a nice man. That's why I liked you from the get-go.
And if people just believe in the golden rule,
Yeah.
you do unto others as you would have others do unto you. That encompasses all the religions and all faiths.
Yeah.
And if you just live with that alone is good enough in my eyes.
I like to say, ask myself the question, are you walking the talk? Are you just full of hot air and you say what your belief are, what your philosophy is, but then when you look at your everyday behavior, too often I'm not following my belief and my structure and my commitment to being a nice human being. But I'm getting better and better.
Yeah,
Again, learning how to be a nice person.
and you're probably critical in yourself.
Yeah.
You're probably much more critical than you should be.
That's a Catholic.
Yes.
See
Yes.
those hole in my chest there?
Yes.
Too many mea culpas.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, you heard that 1,000 times.
Yeah.
Now, where are your parents now?
Both parents have passed. And actually, the only thing that's still existing probably in my whole family in Pennsylvania is the family house. It still belongs to a sister in my family, and she doesn't live there, but she still owns it. So it's something that I can actually drive by and say, well, that's where I grew up.
Really?
Yeah, we took some friends of ours from Florida when we were driving in that area, western Pennsylvania and western Maryland, and he wanted to see where I grew up. And I showed him and kind of drove around the immediate area, and he liked it. He thought it was a great place to grow up. We were right on the edge of a small town. Beyond us was a farm. All the recreation of the whole town was outside my back door. In the wintertime, I could put ice skates on my feet in the house and walk down the back steps of my house and walk not more than 100 yards, and I could step onto an ice skating rink.
Really?
I could walk another 100 yards in the summertime and go swimming in the community swimming pool.
That sounds wonderful.
Right next to the swimming pool was a baseball field and a soccer field, and it was just all right there. So I just had free reign of the whole town. It was that friendly of a town that as a young boy. Until I grew up, it was just open up the door, feed me breakfast, open up the door, let me out.
So your sister is still in the house. How many kids were there in your family?
There were 4 of us. I was the youngest of the 4.
And how often do you see the others?
Not as often as I would like. I have one brother that I could probably easily see more often than not. He is very similar to me. He snowbirds between Florida and North Carolina, though he goes in different locations than I do. I do the same thing. We have a condo on the west coast of Florida between Clearwater and St. Petersburg.
Yep.
And when the hurricane season starts to brew up around June 1st, usually earlier than that, we pack it up and we go into the mountains of North Carolina. Plus, it's also cooler there.
Yeah.
So we kind of travel and follow the warm breezes. And when it gets too cold in North Carolina, we pack things up and we go back to Florida. And it's kind of fun because we're always in the sunshine, one way or the other, and there's always a lot of activities, something to go to, something to see, something to hear, a lot of concerts, a lot of art shows, a lot of events.
How long have you been doing that now?
Actually, we've been doing it for probably 30 years,
30
in a way. We started off, both my wife and I are school teachers, and so with the school teacher vacations, as people like to call it, summers off, we would take off and go to North Carolina. We, at a very young age, I went up there and I bought some acreage and a small cabin, and it was just a place to go out into the woods and be quiet and be nice, and watch the grass grow and watch the trees grow, and just look at the chipmunks and the squirrels and wild turkeys. So it's something we started early, and it wasn't until I retired in when was it? It was 2004 that we started doing this on a more serious basis, where we 7 months in one place and 5 months in another.
How many kids do you have?
I just have one daughter.
And where is she?
She lives locally. She lives about a half an hour from here, in the Tigert area. Yeah, I guess.
And what's her name?
Greta.
Greta, you want to say hello to Greta? Tell her,
Yes.
tell her how you feel about her.
Oh, I love my Greta. She's she has given me 2 of the most wonderful granddaughters that any person could ever have, and they're both beautiful, and they're beautiful in the heart, and they're beautiful in their face. And it's.
I would never guess, looking at your face and your eyes right now, I can see it.
yeah, they're very, very nice person. She's always been a nice person, and she's always stayed that way.
A question about your political persuasion. Politics seem to be so topical nowadays with what's going on in the world and recalling 9/11 and all that kind of stuff. Would you see yourself as a centrist, a leftist, or a rightist, or any way you want to describe it, if you want to describe it at all?
Well, I'd have to say I lean to the right, but there are many issues that that I can understand, and I do lean a little left to.
Sure.
And it all depends. And the very first time that I ever registered to vote, I went down to the office, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. This is, I was basically against all that voting stuff. I felt disenfranchised from the time that I was in Viet Nam, and being there at the age of 20, whereas I was at the time, they had not changed the voting to 18, so I was not legal to vote. I wasn't legal to buy a beer, but I was legal to go to war, and that bothered me.
Of course.
That bothered me greatly. It, I don't like to use the cliche. It's unfair, but it was. It's almost inhuman to ask a person to go to war and not be allowed to vote, or even to engage in a beer or something of that nature. And it bothered me for quite a few years.
Yeah.
And I stayed apolitical as much as I could. And I can't remember who it was that came along. Where somebody, either I wanted to vote for somebody or I wanted to vote against somebody. I don't remember who it was that was running at the time. But when I went to register to vote, and they asked me what party affiliation, I said none. I said I want to be independent, and in the state of Florida they don't have an independent party. And I said, well, what's the closest thing that you have? And they said, well, you have a nonpartisan. And I said, is that a party? And they said, no, it's just that you're neither a Republican or a Democrat.
Sure.
And I said, that's me. And I simply vote for the person and not the party. party loyalists mean nothing to me. You know, that's not a thinking person's party.
You're an
you know.
independent thinking person.
Independent thinking is
Yeah.
you know, how I would always do it.
Do you have any memberships in political, civic, or social organizations that come to mind? I belong to maybe 10 or 20 different things through the years. I'm a joiner.
Yeah.
ACLU and Common Cause and Public Citizen and a whole bunch of others. And if it's nothing more than getting their publication once a month and see what they're up to, because I like to support organizations that are advancing what America is about, what it's supposed to be about.
Yeah, I don't belong to those types of parties.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a Vietnam veteran,
Yes.
and I once tried to join the VFW. In fact, I did join the VFW.
We'll talk somewhere about in the second half of the show about your adventures in Vietnam.
But
That's a good point.
you know, and that was an organization that I once belonged to, and then I belonged to two other ones beyond that. But they were all somehow connected to service and
Sure.
my military service.
And any persons from the past or alive today that you particularly looked up to or admire? Any names come to mind?
Ooh.
Sometimes somebody remembers somebody who thinks about it, and sometimes they don't.
Really, the only thing I can think of, I love the press that the new Pope is getting. He's changing people's ideas. I'm hearing more things, and I'm not a Pope follower or anything, but I do watch the news, and I'm attuned with the people that are out there that are making a difference.
Sure.
And he is a person that's making a difference.
He
As
is.
far as
He is.
politicians, I don't see anybody that's making a big difference. President Obama has really added a lot to our political system, even through his race and through his intelligence. He's brought that into our world that we never had before, and I appreciate him for that.
We're on the same page, and yet there's a couple of things about him that I'm unhappy with him. But it's your story now.
Yeah, and again, it's and there are some things that I'm unhappy, but he's a type of person that I feel that's intelligent enough that he's going to make a decision, and whether we don't agree with it now, we may agree with it later on down. History may, be a little more kinder to him than the initial today's history.
He's got a tough road to hoe nowadays, don't he?
He hasn't had it easy at all.
Yeah.
And,
So I'm looking at the clock, and my director's going to yell at me if we don't take a break. So, Mr. Director, can we take a break for a few minutes? And he says, yeah. So we'll be off camera. Well, we're back, and thanks for staying tuned. And for you viewers who missed the opening of the show, you're watching Conversations with Dr. Don. It's an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like my guest here about who he is and some more stuff about his history and what he's been doing all these years. And let's pick up where we left off. So, what was it like growing up in your small town? Can you say a few more words about that?
Yeah, it was a very friendly small town. Very blue collar. We had a railroad. It originally was a railroad repair station.
Mm-hmm.
They had a roundhouse. It was right in the center of the village. My great grandfather was a conductor, and I think his father was also a conductor. It had one major industry, which was a Westinghouse Electric Corporation. That kind of, at the time, it inherited the people who knew how to work with ceramics. It was built on the site of where they at one time had made plates and bowls, and back in the early days when the towns actually made the cookware and the drinkware.
And they weren't made in Asia or something.
Right, they weren't made in Asia. They weren't, you didn't buy them at Walmart. There wasn't a Walmart then.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so the artisans, the people who knew how to do that craft, were able to walk into the Westinghouse Corporation and make insulators like you'd see on electric poles.
Oh, yes.
And power substations
Ceramic
and all.
stuff, yeah.
And my father worked there night shift for like 44 years, and which is what eventually killed him. It was the ceramic dust that he breathed, and probably for the last 20 years of his life, I don't remember a day that he didn't cough. Consistently throughout the day and during the night, but he would get up, at nighttime and go to work and come home at 7:30 in the morning every day.
Is that why you didn't follow in his footsteps as a profession or a trade?
I don't know. I don't think that was the trade that I wanted. A lot of friends of mine in my age that were not going on to college were getting good jobs in the steel mill, and that was one of the jobs that was out there. Whereas you could actually go in as a beginner sweeping floors, and in 1968, 69, you would start off at $5.35 an hour.
I forgot to ask you about your formal education. Will you talk about that for a few minutes?
Yeah, I would. I graduated from high school in my hometown, and it wasn't until I did well. I could have done much better, but I wasn't focused.
That's me.
School was a fun place to be. I socialized more than I studied, and it's not because I found it hard. And it wasn't until I actually went to college that I found education was pretty easy. I learned faster, and I surprised myself at how easy it was to make A's. Even though I don't think I ever made an A in high school, other than say PE or something like that. But it was all mine.
Were the girls distracting?
They were always distracting me. There were just too many of them, it was that conqueror. And then every town there was, if you just went 15 miles in 3 different directions, there was always another town with a whole lot more girls. And that's where I met.
What does Sue say about your view of girls nowadays?
She was one of my girls from the other town.
Will you tell her how you?
Who?
Sue.
Oh, my Sue?
Your Sue.
My Sue.
Yeah.
Oh, well, my Sue and I, we went to different schools together, and you know, I don't know if I would say that she was my first girlfriend, but she was my first real girlfriend. You know, one that you know, I just knew right off the bat that she would be my wife someday.
44 years.
44 years. And, you know, same person, and she looks only, you know, a couple of minutes older than when I met her, whereas I look, you know, decades older than when I met her. But
It's marvelous to see such love as you talk about
yeah,
her.
I do have it. I do
Right.
have it. She's a special person, you know, and we do well together. We do the best we can together, put it that way.
So how long after high school did you go to college?
Well, I graduated from high school in 1967,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't start college until, I believe it was 1973 when I got out of the service. And
So that whole time frame, how long were you in the service?
4 years.
Uh-huh.
I did 4 years in the Air Force.
Uh-huh. And what did you do in the Air Force for the most part?
But by the most part, the Air Force made me a military policeman, or as
An
as,
MP.
as a you know, as the Air Force calls them, a security specialist.
Oh.
But yes, an MP. And you know, that's I went to basic training in Lackland, Texas, and stayed there from the end of basic training on into the military police school.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in Texas, around Lackland, Texas, from May until I think it was almost September until I, you know, got my first assignment. My first assignment was Columbus, Ohio, at Lockbourne Air Force Base, and then shortly after I was stationed there, that's when I got married.
Did you become an NCO when you were in the service?
Yeah, I became an NCO while I was in Vietnam. I made sergeant while I was in Vietnam,
Uh-huh.
and then I remained, and that was after 2 years. I had a 4-year enlistment, and after 2 years, I made sergeant, and I remained sergeant for 2 years until
You volunteered?
I got it. Yeah, I was a draft-inspired volunteer.
I haven't heard that term in a long time.
I actually had my draft papers. This is before they had the lottery. You know, they had a lottery system that went on. They started, I believe, it's either late 70 or Christmas of 1970, I think it was, but I was drafted under the old system in 1969. And where they just kind of pulled your name out of a hat, and at that point in time, prior to that, I was talking to the Navy recruiters and the Air Force recruiter. My oldest brother was in the Navy, and I always looked up to my oldest brother, and I thought, you know, he looked good in the uniforms. Maybe I would look
Same
good
thing here,
in,
my brothers. I had
yeah,
two of them in the Navy.
Yeah, and it was just, you know, you kind of go with what you know.
Sure.
And I thought he was just having fun in the Navy. Well, it turns out he was probably having too much fun. You know. A little interesting story about my brother. He's a very, very bright fellow. I asked him one day, I said, Frank, I said, what rank did you have when you left the Navy? And he said, well, he says, I made E5 4 times. And it took me a while to register that. I said, you made E5 4 times. And it turns out that you know, he and the bottle, you know, got into trouble a lot. And
I made PFC a number of times too when I was in.
and I didn't you know, go that route, but it took me a while to understand what he meant. You know, he made and because he was that sharp, and because he was you know, he had a critical area that he was in. He repaired TV type thing, radar screens,
Sure.
and with the Navy, and he flew reconnaissance from Newfoundland to the Azores and back. That he could get in trouble, he could get busted, he could get his rank back within months. So he did well, and I guess you can say he was kind of a typical Navy, and and I know that's probably a sore point with some people, but
Where is he now?
he's in California. He's in Pacific Grove, California.
Yes,
Beautiful area, and he loves it
Of
there.
course, it's beautiful there. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, just right next to Monterey, and
yeah.
a little town that he walks through. He walks his dog down through the town. He's
It's
like me. He's a friendly person. He knows the shopkeepers, and he stops and says hello, and everybody wants to pet his dog. And
Do you see him ever so often?
I do. Just a couple years ago, I went out to Pacific Grove, and a couple years before that, he actually came to Smoky Mountains of North Carolina and visited me. He liked to do long distance camping, long distance driving, and so this was one of the trips that he did by himself. And when he was done with it, he said that was probably going to be his last trip. He, like I said, he's my older brother, and he doesn't want to do the driving, the distance driving anymore. So it's either he'll come see me or I'll come see him. But we luckily with today's Facebook and with everything there, we can chat, we can talk, and cell phones, we can talk all the time. And so it's made us closer.
Good.
Yeah.
Now, we've talked a couple of times. You mentioned you were in Vietnam, and I've had Vietnam vets on as guests before, and I had a different flavor of a reaction to Vietnam and serving in Vietnam from guests. I've had a lot of them on, and would you want to talk a little bit about Vietnam for you?
Yeah, I could talk a little bit about that.
What comes to mind now would be of interest to our viewers when you were in Vietnam.
Well, it's like any war. There's a tremendous amount of boredom, and then all of a sudden, everything hits the fan, and you have to do something. You have to act fast, and you have to, and that's probably no different than any other wars. My war was the same. I tried to look for something to do other than what I was assigned to do. I did my work. I did my shifts religiously. I was in military police. I was in charge of keeping everything secure inside a small radar base that was just located north of Da Nang, and a very, very small place. My head where I slept was, if I went through the sandbag wall, there was a chain link fence, and beyond that chain link fence was several coils of concertina wire. So we were that close to the jungle, within feet. And my job there was mainly I sat on bunkers and I did sentry duty. Anywhere from 8 to 12 hours a night, sometimes up to maybe 15 days in a row before you get a day off. Not always, but and then you had to maneuver your days off to get a day off. And then there was just no place to go. So what do? You try to get some extra sleep, maybe.
Were you there when Tet came off?
The T0627, no. They have a Tet every year,
Yes.
because it's based on the Chinese New Year, and our Tet was pretty much uneventful. The Tet of 1970, but they would do the enemy, the Viet Cong would do attacks in accordance to our holidays. So instead of having a large attack on their holiday, they would send rockets in on Christmas, or they'd send rockets in the day, the day after the 4th of July or the day before the 4th of July. Just something to aggravate us and to keep us on guard, and which is something that we all did all the time. Almost 24/7 was to be on guard.
How many months were you in Vietnam?
I was there for 13 months.
13
And
months.
yeah, my original stay was supposed to be, I was supposed to get there right before I turned 20. And
Just
I was
a boy then, huh?
yes, and well, I take that back. Right before I turned 21, I correct that, and because I was still 20 years old when I got there, and I remember having a birthday, and not being able to go buy a beer. Again, that bothered me.
Yeah, of course.
And then a year later, I had another birthday when I was there, and I was 21. And then a short time after that, it was the next month after, since my birthday's in July, I left in August. So I was there for 13 months, 2 birthdays in a war zone, and I was ready to leave. They extended me for, I don't know what reason, other than the fact that I was located in a very remote area. I honestly felt like they kind of put us up there and forgot about us. I never saw anybody come in and even check on us at all, for any reason that wasn't a staff sergeant, an E5, or it was nobody. We had no leadership whatsoever. We kind of promoted ourselves from within through attrition. When someone would deroast back to the States, the next person that had been there the longest, that had the rank, that wanted the job, got it. So I sewed on my sergeant stripes. I believe it was in the 1st of June, and I was there for 2 months, and then I finally was called to do some supervisory type stuff, where I was a flight chief and that type of thing, which is a little more of authority. And it was something that we all had to do it, and I had a fellow that was going to take my place when I left, so I trained him. So it was, again, we had no one of leadership, just that the oldest guy there was the one who was the leader.
So, was there a town or a village or some civilian kind of a place to go to on a pass or leave, where you mingle with the locals at all?
Now, the city of Da Nang was on limits for 2 weeks for the entire time that I was there.
Yeah.
And there were soldiers in the city of Da Nang, because they still had a consulate, and they still had some political buildings downtown. But you did not have you could not take a leave and go down there. There was a lot of GIs that would sneak into town. They had girlfriends that lived in town, and they went there and stayed there and actually commuted back and forth to work. But nobody knew where they were, and it was risky. It was a risky business going there.
Been there, done that. I was in the occupation in Yokohama for 27 months.
Yeah.
But luckily I wasn't when there was hostilities going on.
Yes.
But I had a little experience with living in different cultures and with those people,
Yeah, so no, I really didn't get to live with, and really didn't get to experience cultures. I was on top, and I lived and worked on top of a mountain, and we had just the security people that was around. The rest of the people would come up on trucks. They would go into their offices, close their door, and at the end of their shift, they would get in their trucks and go back down the mountain. We stayed there. Like I say, interesting story in Da Nang. The one day that we went into town, I went with 2 friends. They carried an M16 each, and I carried .38. Air Force issued us .38 revolvers.
Yeah.
And we wanted to go to a restaurant. And we wandered the town, and we finally found a restaurant that we went in and ordered. The only thing that they could actually explain to us what it was chicken of some nature. And we had asked for it to be cooked, with some vegetables or something, and then it turns out it was a half a chicken, and when they served it to me, it was still raw. It took them about 40 minutes, and I honestly believe that the chicken was live 40 minutes earlier, and that chicken had been slaughtered and defeathered and cooked, and because it was taking too long, they brought it to me, set it down, and when I tried to cut it, there was still blood in it.
It wasn't like KFC.
No, it was still blood in it, and I refused to eat it, and I asked for it to be cooked more. And in doing that, I got into kind of a verbal battle with the chef, or probably the owner of the restaurant. And I told him, I said, I won't eat this, I won't pay for this. You cook it, I'll eat it, I'll pay for it. And the argument was, no, I cooked it, now you eat it, and then you pay for it. And they gave us some Pepsis. They were like $3.50 for a bottle of French Pepsi. And we were enjoying that. And I still had this argument going. And finally, the cook went back into the kitchen and came out with an M16. And at the very moment he came out with the M16, I pulled a .38. And I reached in my pocket, and I was backing out the door. My two friends were still sitting at the table. And I backed out of the door, and I reached in my pocket, I had some change in there, and I put it down on the table for the Pepsi, and left. And I felt bad for my two friends that were they started to eat their chicken because they saw the cook coming out with an M16.
So you had some high adventure.
Yeah, so they took a couple bites, and I don't think they even swallowed it. I think they just kind of chewed it and spit it back out, and they paid for their meal and left. And we hitched a ride back, and that was my one and only time of going into Da Nang City, and I said, I won't go back there again.
Any final thoughts about your time in Vietnam and having been there and come back? Any closing thoughts? Because I want to ask you a little bit about your education too.
Yeah, closing thoughts are simply that I wish I hadn't gone. I really do. I really wish I understand now that it's now popular to be a Vietnam veteran.
Okay.
Yeah, there are people that want to be Vietnam veterans because it was a bad war. It was a nasty war. It was an ugly war.
Yeah.
And for some reason, people want to be associated with that. And I don't understand it. I was there, and I saw what bad it was. I saw, the children hurt, and I saw what happens in war. And it wasn't a nice place. It wasn't a good war. It wasn't a pretty war, and it wasn't anything to be wanting to be if you weren't there. And so I don't really gain a lot of goodness out of it, other than the fact that there were good people there, and we kind of stepped on them. And it kind of ruined our country with our Agent Orange and our bomb craters. And I still don't understand why. To this day, I still don't understand why. There's all kinds of arguments out there. There's all kinds of people saying that it was a just war. We should have been there. To me, I would have been a happier person had I not gone to Vietnam.
Thanks for your honesty and talking realistically and honestly about how you felt about Vietnam, and having been there, and I really appreciate my viewers experiencing you and how it affected you. Now, time is about running out, so will you say a few words to the viewers, a final message for them before we sign off? Look at that camera right there and tell them.
Well, I'd like to thank Don for, again, we met sitting across from each other down at the waterfront, beautiful waterfront of Portland.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing that I thought of when I looked at Don, because he is youthful looking, is that he may be a Vietnam veteran. And normally I wear a Vietnam veteran's hat. Mm-hmm. And I looked over and he didn't have one on, and so I still kind of thought, he had the same color hair as I. He has a youthful look to almost match my age. Uh-huh. I suspect you're a couple years older than I. I am a couple years younger than you.
We got about 20 seconds now.
Yeah.
Finish up.
And but I was glad to meet Don, and I was glad to share my experiences that I had with Don, and I was glad that he invited me to come to the show, and I thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yeah. It's been a pleasure.
It's been my pleasure.
We'll talk some more when the cameras stop running here. A few public service announcements, Mr. Director. I'm an ACLU member on the screen. You can look at that now. Among the American Civil Liberties Union, they protect our civil liberties. Through the years, they've been very, very helpful in being sure our Constitution is valid. Sometimes they've had decisions that I have not agreed with, but I've stuck in there through the years. And another public service announcements, I think we have to end corporate personhood. The Supreme Court said that corporations are persons and money is speech, and that's not true. I think we need a constitutional amendment to say that money is not speech and corporations are not persons, because they don't go to jail or go to the chair or whatever. And I got to thank you for watching. And remember KFC and not Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dr. Don's KFC. Kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind, be friendly, and be charitable to you too. And you too.
Thank you.
And you too, nurse. Thanks again for watching. See you next time.